Streaming. Share. Okay, looks like we are live. All right, I'm back here with Jeff for Philosophy Hammer, and this is I think, our seventh book that we're going to be reviewing and discussing. This time it is Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher. This is a book I read before, and I'm a real big fan of. And I think it's a great introduction to kind of the how capitalism actually feels like to live under, especially late capitalism, what we're in right now. So Jeff, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. So the way you described it as how it feels like to live under late capitalism is so exactly right. This book says a lot of stuff that is on reflection obvious, but sort of needs to be pointed out. it's Yeah, having read it and looking at it, yeah, of course. But it was the interesting thing is that it had to be told to us. So it's like I guess I was a fish in water, but not realizing I was in water and being told about it.
Yeah.
And then you start to see a lot of it. It's all over it literally is everywhere. And I guess the first point that he makes in the first chapter, which is actually the title of the chapter, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. We have so many end of world disaster movies, but there really isn't any end of capitalism movies out there, or like it's either total anarchy, as in like back to nature, war, all against all type of thing, or it's continuous capitalism. And yeah, so that's pretty interesting. So capitalist realism, because I understand that he defines it as the widespread sense that not only is capitalism the only viable political and economic system, but also that it is now impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. And a little later in the book, he says that that's one of the major tasks of the left in the world today, is to actually come up with something coherent that is also believable, acceptable to the people. And I think we've talked about that in the past. Marilyn Waring,
Yeah.
in her book If Women Counted, she gave what she believes would be a better world. And it's, having read her book, it doesn't seem impossible. I mean, all the tools are there. We just need politicians to figure that out. Um, so,
Yeah, and
like,
this has been the task of socialists for a long time, but since the 50s and 60s and 70s, with the collapse of the kind of materialist left, there's been no vision to kind of explain it, presented to the working class or to people in general.
exactly, yes. And he does start to touch on that in the end, but for most part, this is a book about what it does feel like to live here. So I guess the second point that he makes in that first chapter is this theme of sterility, and the anxiety that cries out when there's nothing new. And how long can a culture live without anything new? This is something Baudrillard has talked about. He puts it in much more modern terms, or I guess clearer terms. I shouldn't say clearer. Baudrillard had a very special style. But the idea that there's nothing new, everything's just been regurgitated back to us. Um, and there's plenty of examples. I mean, how many times can we see a Survivor show, right? How many
Or
seasons of that? It's
or
the
or
same.
superhero movie remake,
Yes. Oh,
literally any popular movie remake from
yes.
the 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yes. And in many ways, they're all getting worse. Cinematography, they're all getting better, though. The new Star Wars movies are, uh, everything's wrong with them.
Yeah, they're pretty
But they
cringe.
certainly were fun to watch.
Yeah.
Actually, they're almost fun to make fun of in many cases. So it's very much all the same, and there's very little new stuff. Yeah,
I wanted to
that's
touch on that point about sterility, though, because
yeah.
this is very interesting, because when my ex girlfriend and I went to Nicaragua for a month or so, that was kind of and came back in February to a very cold, gray, um, bleak Canada inside of our kind of bleakly painted walls, and sterile environment. It was the kind of sterility of it all, and like being like you're all of a sudden separated, torn from kind of nature and community that was so deep in Nicaragua, because everybody was basically living like with like you're woken up by the dogs and the pigs and the turkeys and the every day
Mm-hmm.
there living basically with nature, but we're so sterile in this environment here in Western
Yeah,
late capitalism.
yeah. There's definitely that meaning, and I suspect he's also talking about like the cleanliness that we have is it's not clean in the traditional sense of what it would be to like have a sand bath or just a water bath. It's sterile, as in you're trying to get rid of the biome on your skin, which is of course not a very healthy thing to do. And capitalism tells us that, like, I mean, we need conditioner, we need shampoo, we need a rinse, we need whatever else we need. Sterility is a theme of capitalism and late capitalism. Because the more you sterilize, ideally, the myth goes that the safer you are, which is not entirely true. It's actually the reverse. If you sterilize
Yeah, it's
your
this
skin too
kind
much,
of running away from and fear of nature, and
yes,
this hyper modernity. Well, we're tricking ourselves into thinking we can separate our lives from the rest of nature.
yep. And then we wonder why we have so many more diseases that affect us than in the
And
past.
mental health
But
issues.
yes, and which we will get into later on, and that's part of the problems with capitalism is increasing diseases of every kind as well as mental illness. Uh-huh. All right. Also, he tends to bring up a lot of Deleuze and Guattari, which we've covered in the philosophy club, but we should probably do a session on them, a couple of sessions on them, because they pretty much started the anti-psychology movement and linked it to capitalism. They were pretty cool in that respect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so capitalism, according to them, is anti-psychology movement, and the more capitalist we are, the more schizophrenic we are.
Yes, this is an interesting concept too. The schizophrenia of capitalism.
Yeah, you got to go up and down. You got to be both a seller and a buyer. You've got to make a profit, avoiding a loss. There's all that. There seems to be two in everything.
Well, and you just you're kind of stripped of your identity and purpose too, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
the sort of postmodern part I think you might be talking about. I'm not sure, but so yeah, so you're being sold identities to yourself. So and you keep your identities wrapped up in these commodities, and this nostalgia, because
Yes.
you don't have anything solid to grasp onto in terms of community and purpose and history, tradition.
Right. Yeah, that's living in capitalism. Now, he does get also into the fact that he calls it capitalist realism, and he doesn't like the term post-modernity, and I tend to agree with him because he is talking about a very specific sense of it, whereas I think personally post-modernity is a little bigger than just the socioeconomics of it all. But yeah, I'm good with him saying capitalist realism is a new term that needs to be coined differently from postmodernism. So in the next chapter, which is called "If You Held a Protest and Everyone Came," he gets into the notion of interpassivity, which Zizek talked about, and we talked about it too. It's almost like vicarious living. If you can watch a show about revolution, hey, that'll satisfy you because you're living the revolution vicariously. And in that sense, capitalism provides you with all the experiences that you need through, say, television or movies or radio or some sort of media. And that's a cheapening of life, even as you are expanding your range of consciousness within a really limited range of what the producers of entertainment are providing. Goes into what Zizek talks about. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's very evocative of like the Matrix, right? Because yeah, people are just kind of harvested for the energy or whatever the machines want them for, but they need to keep their brains active, so they impute on not impute, but they put a screen in front of their brain, I guess, or whatever, in their mind, or download lives and experiences into them as if they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then that's what keeps the economy going. I mean, we have to have an entertainment industry entirely too. So how do you make sense of all this? That's the major task of the West, or of the left, that we have to have in the next. Well, we need to have an we need an alternative, coherent alternative that is both sellable and believable to the people. And that's the difficulty. It's very difficult if you can't even imagine something else. And of course, pop culture wouldn't want you to do that, because that would be counter to their interests. So yes, you kind of need an underground grassroots cinema, or a grassroots upheaval. And I suspect he wants that. How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's obviously got to come from the bottom, but he's kind of alluding to what Marxists talk about, sort of, in that workers have to take their lives into their own hands, take it from the capitalists. I suspect Fisher isn't necessarily limited to the concept of workers, but just kind of people in general. But yeah, that would be the materialist answer.
Mm-hmm. So that was one of the more relatively short chapters in this. Let's see, anything else in there? The overvaluing of belief was a big issue. It was a major paragraph there. Capitalist ideology is concisely put in the overvaluing of belief. You don't want other people to think independently of themselves. They have to believe in whatever is being happening, or whatever is being sold to them. Because if you don't believe the message that, hey, drink Coca-Cola and you'll be happy, then you won't be drinking Coca-Cola. So yeah, another aspect of capitalism living under is we live under the myth that we're a very scientific, very logical, very certain culture, but I think we may have just as much faith and dependence on belief as any other culture in the past, and perhaps even more so, since we're a much more complex culture right now.
That's right. We're eating from the trash can of ideology all the time, like Zizek says.
Yes.
Especially when we don't think we are, is when we are the most ideological.
Exactly. And that's exactly when the Matrix had you, right?
Yes.
All right. Capitalism and the real. Here he gets into Lacanian psychoanalysis. So we've done the real for Lacan, being that which we cannot talk about, that traumatic experience around which we live our lives, trying to avoid, trying to tame, trying to get under control, but never actually facing. And capitalist realism is for him that real, and he's trying to get it to us. So it's not exactly what Lacan was talking about, but he's certainly adapting it. And he does take a lot of Foucault here. So when he describes capitalist realism as more like a pervasive atmosphere, conditioning not only the production of culture, but also the regulation of work and education, and acting as a kind of invisible barrier constraining thought and action. That's very close to what Foucault was talking about when he was talking about sub-ideologies, those things that we don't necessarily see at an ideological level. So it's not clear ideology, left wing or right wing, that kind of stuff. It's what they both share, that everybody almost takes for granted.
Right.
That's the pervasive atmosphere that he's referring to. And it's there. I mean, he's describing it pretty right on, in my opinion. There was one point that he did make in this section that I wasn't so sure of. He says, capitalist realism can only be threatened if it is shown to be in some way inconsistent or untenable. If that is to say, capitalism's ostensive realism turns out to be nothing of the sort. Well, I can suspect that it's pretty much, its realism is nothing of the sort, but
yeah. But when it becomes obvious, I think.
People tend to want to suture their inconsistencies and glide over them, even if it's with ideology. This came from, it's not in the book, but Ernesto Laclau and I forget the other person. They were talking about how all ideology is illogical and not really consistent or complete. So people necessarily suture these elements together as a way to avoid the thinking. And insofar as that happens, and as far as people want capitalism to work or want to keep their jobs or their particular belief system, they will suture even contradictory facts. Or I guess it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good point, and I think it's probably true that now more than ever, capitalist ideology or bourgeois ideology has a hold on us in a way that probably socialists or even Marxists ever imagined it could. But at the same time, I think it's capitalism kind of works a bit like pro wrestling, where in 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, maybe not so much the 90s, but people who are into wrestling, they suspended their disbelief and they basically allowed themselves to believe it was real, even though there was very few smart fans back then. But now it's the business has been exposed, and there's been so many slip ups and so much ridiculousness in how in the presentation that and just because of the internet and things that's no longer tenable. So now you go to a wrestling show and people are like it's a way different vibe. People know everything's fake and staged, but they're just trying to play along. Whereas it was you could allow yourself to get a lot more, feel like it was real, like it was like a hockey game or something before. And I think capitalism is sort of starting to, like, we're starting to see the cracks emerge, and people are. I mean, opinion polls, like 60% of Americans now have a better view of socialism than capitalism. More positive view, and maybe that's just young Americans. I can't really remember, but it's some astronomically crazy amount that you would never expect 20, 30 years ago. So I think the facade is starting to break, and I think it can.
Oh, good. So break, yeah, I'm sure it's going to break eventually, but I'm hesitant to say that it's going to make a difference. I think people will, as they did with wrestling, learn to enjoy it and say, hey, it's not real, but it's entertainment now. It's not a worldwide wrestling federation. It's a worldwide wrestling entertainment, right?
Well, the big changes, actually. They went from calling it pro wrestling to sports entertainment. Yeah.
Sports entertainment, yes.
Right. And that's kind of the giveaway that the jig is up.
Yes, but the jig isn't up. They're still making a ton of money. And maybe even more than before.
Which is funny. They're actually, yes, the business model is much better, yet the people watching it and the attendance at crowds is far lower, which is strange. Yeah, it's strange.
I guess they are making a lot more through pay per view or something.
Yeah. They have their own network. They've got all kinds of other ways to do it. They're better businessmen, but worse at the product, which is, I think, a good metaphor for capitalism in general.
In fact, that would make sense with any material production. So this immaterial production, you can see that it's happening there as well.
Yeah.
All right. One of the other things he mentions here is referencing Foucault, is that emancipatory politics must reveal what is presented as necessity and inevitable to be mere contingency, just as it must make what is previously deemed to be impossible seem attainable. Yes and no. So we've lived through this in the last few months with the pandemic. A lot of things that we thought were never possible suddenly became possible in the service of the state and of the capitalist system. So I'm torn on this. I kind of want it to be true, but I'm finding it hard to suspend my disbelief. The pandemic hasn't brought down any countries. It hasn't. It's in fact maybe made more people more docile, and it's probably better for their health that way. And as he gets into health later, as we'll see, it's part of the ideology of capitalism. But my personal view on a lot of what he says here is that he's much more idealistic than I am, much more optimistic. I'm much more of a pessimist in that sense. I don't think it's going to end that way. I've probably read too much Baudrillard, who thinks this is the end and it's not going to get any better. We're just stuck in it. Um,
I think we haven't really felt the impact of the crisis at all yet. It's being propped up right now by the fumes of capitalism and corporate debt, interest rates, national debt. All these things are at unsustainable levels, and a big crisis was predicted anyway before the pandemic. And I don't see. I think there's going to be a big reckoning in the next 6 months.
In the next 6 months, okay. I'm going to find that a little harder to believe. The unsustainable nature of our credit system. Once it became immaterial, sustainability is less important, because when you have something that's immaterial, it doesn't take up space and doesn't have the same limits as something that's material. When you burn fossil fuels, there's only so much of it in the crust of the earth, so it'll come to an end. But how do you come to the end of, how do you come to the end of money that can be created at any moment, at any time, at any computer that's owned by a bank?
Yeah, you're sounding like the modern monetary theorist right now.
Well, I have major problems with them, but one of them, that sustainability is an issue with debt. It is and it isn't. So interest rates still have a lot of way to go down. I mean, banks can make money. They can go to negative. They can go well below negative too.
Not without triggering either hyperdeflation or inflation. That's why they won't do it. For no. Small amounts of time they can, which is what they have done, but they'll jump right back out.
Well, that's yet to be seen. I mean, there's been a trend in interest rates since the 70s of going down, down, down. Zero is a intellectual idol of the mind. It's a quote Francis Bacon. Just because it's zero doesn't mean that it can't go below zero, and
it can
stay below zero.
It can.
And to stay.
I don't think it can stay below zero.
So remember, banks make the difference a lot of their money on the difference between what they lend and what they borrow. So for them, zero is nothing. It's just a number, as long as they keep making money in a sense. But the virtue of going below zero is that people will spend more money and prop up capitalism. And I suspect that will continue in the future. It has the potential to be a major stimulus. And as debt grows, and by the way, debt needs to grow. We live in a system where there's two classes of people: those who can create money and lend it at interest, and those who borrow at interest. Now, the interesting thing about this is that when you borrow at interest, you're always paying back more than it's been created. So there's always going to be a certain debt in the system. That debt has to become manageable, and in order for it to stay manageable, the interest rates have to keep going down and down and down below zero. So I personally believe that we can continue to increase the debt, especially with negative interest rates. With negative interest rates, that's pretty much sustainable forever.
Well, I mean, the governments are panicking, so I don't know about that. But
it's because it's something new for them. But
the thing I would say is that it's that none of that's, that stuff is all, even if that were all true and you could sustain it forever, and none of that solves for
I shouldn't say forever, but at least for our foreseeable future. Because I mean, the idea of hyperinflation is a change in the money supply versus the goods and services that are offered. That's enormously different. So as long as you're creating immaterial goods and lots of them. Sorry, somebody's throwing a fireworks.
But production is where value comes from in the first place. Or sorry, where's where profit?
Yes, but you can have immaterial production, yes. And immaterial production has no limits.
Not without human labor, though.
Oh, that might also be changing.
Well, that's why capitalism is going to run into problems, because there's nothing from which to extract surplus value. But we're getting too far into economics. We should probably
Okay, get back onto this point. So one major point he does make is that fantasy. The fantasy structure on which capitalist realism depends is a presupposition that resources are infinite, that the earth itself is merely a husk which capital can, at certain points, slosh off as unused skin without any problem that can't be solved in the market. So yeah, I tend to agree that that's a fantasy. It's important to recognize the difference between sustainable, renewable, and immaterial production. And the immaterial ones you can produce forever. And sustainability is not an issue, but definitely the earth itself has got major limits on it, and can't be producing too much more there.
No.
So later on that page near the bottom, the relationship between capitalism and eco-disaster is neither coincidental nor accidental, he claims. Capital's need of a consistently expanding market, its growth fetish, means that capitalism is by its very nature opposed to any notion of sustainability. So again, on this point, I tend to disagree. Yes, it's true within the material realm. I don't think it's true within the immaterial realm. And as long as we move into,
you still need material to you still need the material realm to support that immaterial realm.
Oh yeah, and within the material realm thank you, there is sustainable practices, and I'm sure capitalism will find them in order to keep itself going. So
but I don't go on. I'm not gonna
you're not gonna get there.
I'm not gonna argue that one.
All right, so the future of capitalism is in the immaterial realm, and I see it a bit like the Industrial Revolution to the Agricultural Revolution. We do produce more food now than we did in the past, but it's a much smaller percentage of total production. Material production will increase in the future, hopefully more sustainably, but it's going to pale in comparison to immaterial production. And anyway, that's my personal view on the future. Then he gets on to something that we read about with Byung-Chul Han, the Achievement Society that he talks about. He's talking about the psychological distress that is the privatization of stress, the making us responsible for stress as opposed to the system.
Yes.
We live in an individualistic culture that likes to blame the individual, praise the individual for success, and blame them for failure. That's not very helpful in many cases. I got into an argument with counsel last night about systemic racism. And
okay.
Yeah, you might have read about it in the paper.
No, I haven't. This should be interesting.
You haven't read it in the paper yet?
No.
Okay. People on council were very upset that I said that they can practice their racism later. This was in reference to whether we should allow Indigenous people to have an un-white man interrupted vision of how to express their past grievances against us. I was arguing that they should, and most people were arguing that no, they shouldn't. We should be together on that. In any case, I had to blurt that out because clearly they were being racist.
What were they asking for?
No, what I was asking for. So, there's a statue of Sir John A. and there's plaques that go around all over the city.
Yeah.
They tell the white narrative of how great Sir John A. was, but they tend to not to have the indigenous perspective or any indigenous perspective at all.
Yeah.
So we want to have their perspective. However, here's the interesting thing. What we want is to put white people on that committee, or in this case, a working group, to decide how to express First Nations feelings about this. And I had a major problem with that. I felt that that's a sort of a structure of domination. It's neo-colonial. It's paternalistic, it's patronizing. But because it was recommended by the consultants who were themselves First Nations, I lost. But the point that I was trying to suggest was that we live in a racist society. It's a systemic racism, which makes racists out of anybody in the society, which means that racism is our default position.
At least it produces racist results.
Well, no, it produces, it forms the minds of the subjects within the society as well. So our default position is a racist one. And to say, and to leave things as they are is racist. It's automatically racist. our task in a systemic racist society, if we're trying to overcome that, is to identify it, make changes in our lives. But all our default values, all our default
I
inclinations are
disagree.
racist. And yes, and I can call you racist for that, but I'm just kidding. The point is that racism shouldn't be labeled as a moral failing, because when you do that, similar to what he's saying here, is you're
Yes,
blaming
yes,
the
that's true.
individual when it's the society, or in the case, the system, that's creating or forming the individuals with certain values and certain prejudices. And that's the systemic racism. So
Okay, yeah. So I agree with you
you're
there.
racist. Yeah, so you're racist in a culture that's full of systemic racism. You are racist until you make a conscious decision and identify a racist aspect of your life and change it consciously. Otherwise, you're still racist. People didn't like that, and
Yeah, actually no, I'm going back to disagreeing with you on that one, but it's still not the subject of our.
oh well, it was the idea of the individual being stressed as the and any failures being blamed on the individual.
Wait, so are you saying it's the individual's responsibility to fight systemic, like to get the systemic racism out of them or something? I'm not sure what I'm understanding.
Yes. So
So you, but
at the individual level, systemic racism create. Okay, so the thing is that
but if
we
it's
are
systemic, it's
created.
something that individuals can't beat out of them. They can't fight systemic racism by looking inward and examining their own biases.
No, that's the first step. That's the first step. The second step is to act on the new knowledge. So if somebody points out to you that, hey, you're in a system of domination, you never thought about it before, that's a realization that can change your behavior, and that change in behavior reduces your racism.
Okay, so I'll just say that that's the liberal perspective on it, as opposed to the Marxist perspective on it.
It's certainly, I don't think it's Marxist, but I'm not sure it's liberal, because liberals tend to be the biggest problems here.
Oh yeah, but philosophically, I think it's the liberal.
Oh, I see. Yeah, versus conservative. Yeah, it's a very postmodern notion. In fact, it comes from post-colonial theory.
Yeah, which Marxists have issues with.
Yeah, well, Marxists have issues with anything that's not Marxist, right? And
Well,
even some things that are Marxist. But as post-colonial, as postmodernists would say, there's more than one way to look at anything. And looking at racism from that kind of a lens, from a systemic lens, necessitates that anybody living in a systemic racist society has to identify themselves as racist until they make a conscious decision at any particular point not to be.
right, but so you can do all those things, but that doesn't change the system because the system is upheld by the material conditions. That's the
Oh
Marxist
yeah, I
perspective.
pointed that out. It's upheld by a lot more than just the material conditions. We live in a system of common law written by white men. I was trying to point this out. Somebody was asking, like, I don't see the domination. Where is it? And that's where I had to say, we live in a system of common law designed by white men, like for the last 1,000 years. We live in a province run mostly by white men, writing acts mostly run by white men. We live in a city that writes bylaws written mostly by white men. And now we're forming a committee to oversee the indigenous response to how they feel about Sir John A. And they're going to be, in a sense, babysat by white people.
Yeah.
So we've written the rules, we're playing the game, we've unbalanced it all in our direction. And the only thing that I could see that would be less racist here would be if we were to take out the white people from their expression, from deciding how they express their feelings about Sir John A. And I lost that. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, so that was a little off topic. But anyway, getting back to this, the postmodernists would look and say that part of the problem with capitalism is that it thrives on making the individual the responsible party and making things moral failings. And that's not the case. Byung-Chul Han agrees with this guy, and I tend to agree with him, that that's what society's pushing on us. And unless we make a conscious effort on our side to look at this ideology of capitalism and say, this is not for me, we're going to burn ourselves out. He wrote a book called Burnout Society. And who will we be blamed? Who will be blamed for burnout? Well, the individual. I mean, clearly he didn't have his act together. It's his fault. The postmodern notion would say, well, actually, he was brainwashed. His default position was to do what he was told, live a life seeking happiness in material possessions and achievement and all that kind of stuff. And he never thought about it critically enough to say, no, that's not exactly for me. And that's, yeah, he's right. Jung Chul Han is right. And I believe that post-racial and post-colonial thinking is right on that. It does take an individual reaction against what they have been taught and made to be by society. Takes a
collective action of organizing against the system to bring it down, because otherwise it just gets reproduced. It doesn't matter how you could have everyone in the world look inward and examine their bias. You'd still get racist outcomes or gendered outcomes or whatever, because the system itself is materially based, and you need to change that first.
Is because the system is materially based?
Because of the class relations. Reproduce that systemic racism.
I suspect that you were right about the first part. I'm not. I won't grant you the part on because it's class based.
Okay.
It's probably got to do more with fear of change, benefits to keeping it if you're white, for example, refusal to see. But anyway. Yeah, self-examination is necessary but not sufficient. I'll grant you that much. Collective action would certainly be a more effective way than simply individual, but it does have to start at the individual level. Actually, no, it's not true. It has to start at the individual level for some people. There's other people that can just join the cause and not have to worry about it. The foot soldiers in some cases. But anyway, you know how revolutions go, right? Not everybody has to be Lenin.
That's right. Thank God.
Okay. All right. So next chapter was chapter 4. Here's a big star I have here. The pathologization already forecloses any possibility of politicization by privatizing these problems, treating them as if they were caused only by chemical imbalances in the individual's neurology and or by their family background. Any question of social systematic causation is ruled out. And that's just saying what we were talking about in different words. He's referring here, he uses the words reflective impotence, which is the unstated worldview among the British young, or I guess anybody, that pathologizes and instead of politicizing problems.
Pathologizes.
So, yeah, pathologize. So you're hungry. Well, that's your fault for not working hard enough to earn enough money to feed yourself. No, can it be societies? Maybe they're not paying you enough. Oh no, it can't be that. No.
Yeah, you got low back pain from digging ditches all day. No, that's your fault. You're not taking care of your body well enough.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we see that all the time, and that's blaming the individual, blaming the victim in a sense. And it was postmodern feminists who were talking about blaming the victim as a as a technique of power. All right. So interpassivity again. He talks about liberal communists again being the big problem. Yeah, it's liberals.
Does he actually?
He does talk about it. It's on page 27 of the book.
So he's read Zizek.
Yeah, well, he's talking about, he's using the same term. It's striking how the practice of many of the immobilizers is a kind of inversion of another group who also count themselves heirs to 68. The so-called liberal communists, such as George Soros and Bill Gates. That's straight out of Zizek. So George Soros and Bill Gates, liberal communists, right? They drain the society that they come in, make a huge amount of money, and then give back to it according to their wishes.
Yeah.
Anyway. And
in cultural form.
Yeah, so they're maintaining they're pretty. Yeah, George Soros, he's like supporting some university in Hungary or something like that that's under investigation for spreading too much liberalism in a country
Oh
that
yeah,
doesn't
well
like it.
yeah, that doesn't surprise me. The Huns, what do you call them? Huns? I guess you wouldn't do
The
that.
Hungarians,
Isn't that a
the,
racist term? Yeah,
the Hungarians.
Hungarians. Yeah, yeah, the proto-fascist government there. So big surprise.
Hmm. Okay, so here's another. The current ruling ontology denies any possibility of a social causation of mental illness. This is in the next chapter 5, I believe. The chemical biologization of mental illness is, of course, strictly commensurate with the depoliticization. Concerning mental illness, an individual's chemical biological problem has enormous benefits for capitalism. And this is so true. First, it reinforces capitalists' drive towards atomistic individuals. You're sick because of your brain chemistry. And second, it provides an enormously lucrative market in which multinational pharmaceutical companies can prattle their pharmaceuticals. All mental illnesses are neurologically instantiated, but this says nothing about their causation. So there's a benefit labeling everybody as sick. You help the pharmaceutical industry design new placebos or something slightly better than placebos, and selling them at high prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The commodification of illness.
Yes.
And of actually, not even of illness, of kind of normal human reactions, responses to alienated like capitalism.
Yeah.
So they create the problem. The capitalists have created the problem, and now they're selling us the antidote. Yes.
Yeah. Or the cure, right? Which just creates its own problems. Then he goes on to office politics. This is chapter 6. And I love this term he creates, market Stalinism. I love it. It's beautiful. It's I see this so much. Okay, so just to
in council?
Yes, in council. Oh my gosh.
Market Stalinism. You should say this, repeat the term then to them.
Market Stalinism.
Tell them they're being market Stalinists.
Yeah. So he defines it as valuing of symbols of achievement over actual achievement.
Yes.
When we increased the last night, we increased the domination of whites over indigenous people, and that's what factually happened. But everybody saw it as a great achievement of reconciliation.
Yeah.
Having entirely missed what reconciliation is about, where there's a certain equality, but we're deepening the domination relationship.
We have a slogan: revolution, not reconciliation.
Who's we?
Some of my buddies, my scientific socialists.
Scientific socialists. Okay, I hope you guys weren't the guys putting red paint on the statue.
No,
they're looking for you.
That was not.
They're looking for you.
No, we don't engage. That's probably anarchists.
Don't you identify that way too?
No.
Okay, so yeah, market. Oh, I love this term, market Stalinism. The idea of like the symbols of achievement over actual achievement, and we see this so often with debt, right? People want to get the symbols of success rather than being able to actually pay for them. And we see this, and as he describes his life in a school, I guess, or college in England, where they have to label or say what they've been doing accurately, and that's more important to management than their actual teaching. And I've met people who are like that here in Canada. My sister, for a time, had to report what she was doing every 15 minutes while working at home. And I suspect it's probably going up during this pandemic as people are working from home. They have to codify and record what they've been doing. And of course, that's counterproductive to whatever it is they're doing. But it allows for a certain amount of surveillance. It allows for, I guess, documenting of what they're doing, which is
sheets.
Yeah. That's the term I was looking for.
Yeah, when I was working at a engineering firm, they started giving us these timesheets, and they took so much time to do just to like remember everything. How long did it take me? 15 minutes. So this took 2 hours, and documenting it was ridiculous, absolutely nonsense thing we had to do. But
Yes. But hey, you're being successful in your job because hey, look what you did. You can document it, and that's market Stalinism right there. And so, in his case, he was talking about how it was more important for the college to make sure that he wrote down what he was doing than actually teaching the students. It's like at that point, what's the point of going to school except fill out forms? There's something definitely wrong there. So that's. And I see this so much. Oh my God, it's everywhere in politics. It's literally everywhere.
Tyranny of metrics.
Yeah, well, there's a place for metrics, but there may be an overuse of something. This is an Aristotelian concept, of course, right? There's a natural golden mean to everything. You go too much in one direction or the other, you screw it up. And that's definitely the case with the metrics, or that seems to be the case in many cases with metrics. So what else does he say here? Okay, the way value is generated on the stock exchange depends, of course, less on what a company really does and more on perceptions of and beliefs about its future performance. That's stock market trading 101. You don't want to get into something after everybody's figured out what its future performance is like. And that's kind of crazy. But
would that apply to what we're seeing today at all, you think?
I think it's applied for ages. It was who was it? Joseph Schumpeter, I think it was, who was talking about he made like a fortune in the stock market, or maybe it was Keynes. He did that too. Anyway, one of those, the first one, I think it was Schumpeter, saying like, most people are just playing a game here in which they're trying to figure out what everybody else thinks. Yeah. And some people play the game to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 iterations. It's like, here's what these people think. These people are thinking about them doing this, and since they know that, they're going to think about this. And it's like, really? Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, it's like a mix of like chess and a casino.
Yes, and I'm reminded of that scene in The Princess Bride where they're debating about if he poisoned the chalice or not. Yes. Like, knowing that I was going to pick that one, you picked the other one. But thinking that I was going to say that, you must have put it on the other one.
Yeah, exactly. Great scene.
Yeah. All right. So what else does he talk about here? Yeah, he mentions Baudrillard, who's one of my more favorite philosophers, and also esoteric ones. What does he say here? We are integrated into a control circuit that has our desires and preferences as its only mandate, but those desires and preferences are returned to us no longer as ours, but as the desires of the big other. And the big other is a Lacanian kind of term. The accepted superego, accepted norms of society, in a sense. When you hear that voice telling you, "Hey, that's not, you're being a dick," or you're not, don't do that, kind of stuff. Clearly, these circuits are not confined to television. Cybernetic feedback systems, focus groups, and such are now integral to the delivery of all services, including education and government. Yeah, it's entertainment in that sense. Proffering, post-Fordian gets into that in the big other. Hey, I guess now we're on chapter 7. Capitalist realism, however, entails subordinating oneself to a reality that is infinitely plastic, capable of reconfiguring itself at any moment. And this is why I worry that exposing its contradictions is not enough. It can prop itself up in different ways. It just changes the props. It's like standing on two legs is inherently unstable, but we know we shift our weight between the two of them, and we can continue to prop up and run and that kind of stuff. But so I'm still mixed on that. I know how you feel, and I know that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the contradictions of capitalism in the early 1900s were starting to show themselves, and that's why they ended up with a big labor movement and 2 world wars. So, and if you look at all the indicators, it looks like that's something that's we're heading that direction again. So that could mean another big jump in class consciousness. But maybe you're right. Maybe it'll plastic its way out of it.
Yeah. The last time we had major class consciousness was the identification of the 1%. And we still hear about that from time to time, but it didn't seem to do much more beyond that.
I think in the younger generation, it has. Basically, we got all these Biden voters still lingering around for no reason. These boomers who gave up on imagining anything other than capitalism, or even better than neoliberal, austerity.
Yeah.
So it's really the boomers' fault. Everything.
Yeah, let's blame them. By the way, I'm not one, even if I may be that old.
Gen X.
For that. Yeah, I'm an X. All right, what else does he say here? So he starts talking about Wendy Brown here, and Brown shows that neoliberalism and neoconservatism operate from premises which are not only inconsistent but directly contradictory. I'm not so sure. I think they're pretty much the same thing, but it's debatable. I mean, we say that, you're left wing, you're right wing, but in our world, left and right are so close together, it's hard to tell, like, compared to what could be out there, right? I mean, within a very narrow confines of what is considered political these days, left and right are pretty far apart. But if you consider that it's a very narrow gap between left and right with what is possibly imaginable, considering what I read or what we read in If Women Counted, yeah, I mean, I can see how it could be true from a very narrow perspective, but I don't see it as true in reality.
Yeah, sorry, he's talking about neocons and neolibs.
Yes.
Yeah, they. I mean, there is a sort of compatibility there. I mean, if you just think of Donald Rumsfeld as kind of the ultimate melding of both of those things. The whole idea that you can privatize and the military and make it more what was he called, sleeker,
more efficient.
More efficient, yeah. And at the same time being pro regime change. But I mean, it's tough because the whole neoconservative ideology is kind of a scam to begin with. It's really just window dressing on imperialism.
Yeah. Yes, he mentions that. So, what is, here we go. In the next chapter, he goes back to Zizek, and it is a mistake to rush to impose the individual ethical responsibility that the corporate structure deflects. The blame will be put on supposedly pathological individuals, those abusing the system rather than the system itself. And that's the point. The individualism is a great thing if you're a success, and a really bad thing if you're a failure, because you can be blamed and praised both ways. But there's a lot of luck in reality for a few people.
Well, it's funny too, because I don't know if he mentions this, but the capitalist kind of ideology is individualism, especially the neoliberal one since the 80s. Yet in practice, it's extremely collectivist, because
for that 1%.
Well, no, I mean, like, yeah, for the but even in terms of how it's like it brings peasant farmers together into the factory and collect and like makes them work together for the capitalist, and its ideology makes it think that they're all working for the same purpose.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's very collectivist.
Yes, but I guess for the wrong people, yes. Or for at least not everybody.
Yes.
So lucky them at the top. Okay, so in the last one's Marxist super nanny. He gets into deeper into that notion. Where is it here? It means recognizing the goal of a genuinely left should not be to take over the state, but to subordinate the state to the general will. Yeah. So the general will is a Rousseauian concept, right? It's like ancient. Uh, I have a bit of a problem with that. This comes from reading about democracy. The general will, uh, anyway, um, I don't know. How do you feel about this idea that our goal should not be to take over the state, but to subordinate it to the general will?
Wait, he says that?
Yeah, it's on page 77.
Hold on. I have it somewhere. Shoot. Well, I mean, no, I would disagree. I think the goal would be to take over the state, the bourgeois state, to smash the bourgeois state, and in place replace it with a proletarian state that doesn't have all the crappy elements like the police and the military. And once classes don't exist, then you don't need those things. But yeah, I mean, it's saying you don't need to you don't need to seize the state is a kind of an opportunist position.
Yeah, so at this point, he's getting into I thought he was getting into something different. Maybe I just missed it in this chapter. Super Nanny. What is needed is the strategic withdrawal of forms of labor which will only be noticed by management. Now, this is true. Fighting back, strikes no longer work in the same way they did in the past, especially in the public sector. You gotta withdrawals of forms of labor which will only be noticed by management. All of the machineries of self-surveillance which have no effect whatsoever on the delivery of education, but which managerialism could not exist without. So, yeah.
So is he just saying you need a more effective means of striking?
I think so. Yeah, that's one of the things.
Well, yeah.
There's something else here. I just must have missed it.
There's a huge problem with careerism and leadership in unions and even workers' parties. So,
yeah.
So that's not a surprise there.
Sorry, there was one other point. I must have missed it, or I didn't circle it as loudly as I should have. There's something about the Super Nanny. He made a reference to the show Super Nanny, and there was something really interesting about that.
Because it was wasn't he saying that it's kind of like guilting?
Yes, guilting parents for giving their children what they want or something, and
it's like you're looking at the bad family and judging them, right?
Yeah, for wanting to be good to their kids or something. Oh, well, I lost it somewhere. I'm pretty sure it's in this.
It's kind of like showing. Isn't it saying that like people watch these shows so they can feel like the problems of society are just on these these bad parents because it individualizes it?
Well, that's part of the virtualization or living vicariously. Like, I'm not like that.
Yeah.
And thank God.
It's like Jerry Springer.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly. Like
thank
Jerry
God
Springer.
I'm not like that. And it's very entertaining for a lot of people because it makes them certainly feel better than their situation would otherwise really permit them. It distracts them from the system that's keeping them down.
Yeah, those shows are addicting. They're addicting.
Yeah.
I've watched a bunch of Super Nanny or similar shows. You? Yeah.
Okay.
I
got rid of it.
Go ahead.
I got rid of my television, but now it seems my kids can download anything, so that was a waste of
time. Yeah, exactly. Everything.
At least I don't have to go through the commercials.
Yeah, that's better.
And that's the book. That's what it's like to live under late capitalism.
Yeah. So I guess the main takeaway, I think, is he's saying that capitalism has basically stolen our idea of progress in the future, and we're kind of stuck in this like limbo of recycling the past and the present. There's no future horizon anymore. There's no possibilities of change, right? It's sort of what he's saying.
Yeah, I think so. That would be yeah, well, I wouldn't say there's no possibility of change. It's just that it's unimaginable.
Yes.
And that's part of the problem. That's what the left has to come up with, is something imaginable and desirable. And Marxism, I'm sorry to say, is not it. Most people look at that and say, don't. I mean, I mentioned to somebody the other day that we're not going to fix the housing crisis without, socialism or Marxism. So don't say that. You'll get yourself unelected. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. Point is, yeah. I once had an argument with you about the difference between evolution and revolution. And at that time, I was much more of an evolutionist. But after the last night's council meeting, by the way, that's why we couldn't do it last night, because we had a council meeting that went on for like 11 hours. So we did it in 2 sessions. I'm thinking we're not doing any evolution here. we're going in the wrong direction. Well, and we're calling it evolution.
But even evolution, though, is the way people think of it is technically is a misunderstanding, right? It's not the way social democrats think of it, as a slow kind of gradual growth towards progress. It's like progress happens, like revolutions happen in there's qualitative changes, and then all of a sudden enough things have built up for the straw to break the camel's back. Franz Ferdinand gets shot, and then the war happens, right? Like it's things. There's a buildup of qualitative changes, and just like evolution, and then all of a sudden one change happens that makes that species explode and turn into a new species. It's not that it slowly happens over time. That's why there's no kind of like in between phases we find.
Well, there's plenty of evidence of that in political history. I mean, look at Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. Look at the fall of the Berlin Wall in East and West Germany, fall of communism, and the fall of the Soviet Union. These things happen like basically overnight, and lots of things build up.
Yes.
At the same time, sometimes we just don't get it.
What do you mean?
Oh, I'm going backwards when it comes to reconciliation and council.
Yeah, well.
But we're calling it progress.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. There's only the kind of progress that is allowable in neoliberal capitalism isn't real. It's never going to be real progress. And the options are ever increasingly limited. The things that you're allowed to do, and Bernie Sanders would have found out pretty quick that even if he won, very little. The limiting of the imagination to very narrow guide rails. Mm-hmm. So how'd you find the book overall? What's your overall takeaway, impressions?
Wow. If I had been not in a pandemic with actually having to, go out and teach this stuff in a classroom, I probably would have done a better job. I'm sorry. I read it once, and then I read it again this morning and this afternoon. My notes and my underlines. I don't like this pandemic at all.
No,
actually, that's not true.
Is it throwing?
I like it in the fact that I'm. Sorry.
Is it throwing your schedule off?
Yeah, and I'm supposed to have a lot more free time, but the concentration just isn't there. On the plus side, I do spend a lot of time more time with my kids, and if it weren't for the pandemic, they'd be out with their friends, and I would never see them. They're both teenagers now, right?
Well, that's the other thing we're finding is that we're finding this pandemic's exposing the kind of lack of structure in our lives, and that if we don't have this 9 to 5 or these if we don't have the ability to go make money for a capitalist, then our whole lives fall apart, and what's left is kind of this emptiness and this lack of meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that ties nicely with the book.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you again for letting me do this.
You're welcome. What's next?
I'm thinking we should go back to Zizek, a book called Living in the End Times. Where is it? There it is. I'll briefly read the cover story. There should be no doubt, and there should no longer be any doubt. Global capitalism is fast approaching its terminal crisis. Slavoj Žižek identifies the 4 horsemen of this coming apocalypse: the worldwide ecological crisis, imbalances within the economic system, the biogenic revolution, and exploding of social divisions. But he asks, if capitalism's demise seems to many people to be the end of the world, how is Western society dealing with life during the end times? In the major new analysis of our global situation, it's not new anymore, by the way. I think this is like pre-2008.
Oh, wow.
In a major new analysis of our global situation, Zizek argues that our collective responses to economic Armageddon correspond to the stages of grief, ideological denial, explosions of anger, and attempts at bargaining, followed by depression and withdrawal. After passing through the 0 point, and he loves the 0 point, we talked about that in violence, right? 0 point of violence. After passing through the 0 point, we can begin to perceive the crisis as a chance for a new beginning. Or as Mao Zedong put it, there is great disorder under heaven. The situation is excellent.
Okay, that sounds like it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks, Jeff. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. Thanks everybody in chat and on YouTube for watching. Over and out.
All the best.
Okay.